Enterprise Management 360.
Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Tech Chat. Now in today's episode, I'll be speaking to Shashi Kiran, who is the CMO at Aryaka. And longtime viewers of the show will know that Shashi is no stranger to EM360. He's been recently featured on our EM360 podcast, Q&A segment, and even Tech Chat before. So it's great to have him back. And today we're going to be picking his expert knowledge and expertise in SD-WAN. And today we're going to be picking his brains about the 5th edition of Aryaka's leading annual State of the WAN report. So Shashi, welcome back to the show. It's always a pleasure to speak to you.
It's good to be back, Max.
It's good to have you, and I always enjoy our conversations, and especially when we have the State of the WAN report coming out, I always think there's some interesting stuff that comes out of it, and especially this year, there's a lot of different elements which are affecting people. So to kick off the show, I think it's only right it comes from you. So could you give us an overview of the report, what it's about, why is this edition specifically subtitled Path to SD-WAN and SaaS Success? And really, how do its findings on the whole differ from the last time that we spoke?
Yeah, so first of all, we think this is one of the most comprehensive survey reports in the industry today. Something that has become an annual ritual for us at Aryaka. And as you said, it's the 5th edition. And this time we went and polled 1,350 global enterprises. So the demographics was pretty rich in terms of who we targeted. Now, as far as the report itself is concerned, the past few years, we were seeing a bit of an organic evolution in terms of how the state of the WAN was, moving along. And this year, there was this huge trigger, if you will, a different kind of forcing function with the pandemic. And that caused certain aberrations that you wouldn't see in the normal trajectory. It accelerated certain trends that we were thinking were about 3 to 5 years out. And it also changed perspectives on what an organization would do with their WAN. In general, we saw the WAN suddenly became even more strategic because now it had to enable their organizations to shift how they deployed their workforce. And this is, as you can imagine, the greatest migration of the human population in history, right? And from a workforce perspective, people who are in the workplace suddenly end up going home. And that was a pretty difficult thing to accomplish overnight for a lot of the IT professionals because the networks weren't simply architected for it. And that has a huge impact on an employee productivity and organizational efficiency. So I think it was a great amount of learning, and it also brought about a rethink in terms of what the new architecture should be. Because one of the things we saw come about, especially with enterprise CIOs, was their need to manage change gracefully, right? And this wasn't planned change, it was almost unplanned change that was thrust on them. And the realization that this can come about anytime means you need to have an architecture that's really geared to handle change gracefully and ensure the business continues regardless of these underlying dynamics.
Yeah, 100% agree. And it's there's a lot in there. I was looking over the findings that were sent over beforehand, and there's a lot to delve into. And it's really interesting to see that shift, even within a year of us speaking. And obviously, that remote working element is so important. So I just want to hone in on that a little bit further. Are there any kind of key network challenges that organizations are currently facing? We've spoken about this mass uptake of remote working.
One of the key areas that we touched upon was obviously how do you look at remote working and how do organizations intend to handle that? Because it is going to have an impact on obviously real estate, it's going to have an impact on connectivity, it's going to have an impact on how are you going to deliver predictable application performance for the user regardless of their location. And all of these things now suddenly come to mind. Otherwise, if you look at remote access and VPN, these are all tried and tested technologies that have been around for a couple of decades, right? And nobody had them as top of mind initiatives anymore. But when you swing the pendulum from having 10% or 15% of your employees being remote to 100% being remote, that is a massive disruption, right? And so what we are seeing from this report is, first of all, the preparation for what we call as hybrid workplaces. which means you need to be able to deliver very consistent, collaborative, and performing applications, regardless of where the user is. It could be a site, it could be a mobile user, it could be a remote user, and all of these boundaries are getting blurred very rapidly. And can you kind of deliver that predictable application performance? So we see this re-architecting happening for the notion of hybrid workplaces, with the ability to manage change from one mode of operation to another. And that also has meant, when we poll certain companies, we see about 25% are ready to get their employees back to work, and some are dependent on employees being in person at work for very efficient outputs, right? There are certain verticals and industries, and we suspect this is more vertical dependent. And there are others that are saying, look, we're not going to let our employees come back to work for another year. We're okay with these employees being remote. And that's roughly about a quarter of the people that we surveyed. And then we have about 50% that's saying, look, I'm going to provide this flexibility. And if they can come in and work, then that's fine. We're going to facilitate that. If they need to be remote, we're going to facilitate that as well. So we saw this kind of divided into 25%, roughly 25% and 50%, where you have these two bookends, and then the middle 50% is really about delivering that flexibility.
Yeah, that flexibility is so key at the end of the day, isn't it? Especially when, as you said, there's going to be so many different elements of how people are going to want to work going forward. And this isn't just for the next year. This is changing work life forever. So it's interesting to see and how organizations can kind of use that. And speaking about the future, I think it's always important to kind of end on this note. So I found it interesting in the report, 57% companies across EMEA, they're planning to terminate all or some of their multi-protocol label switching deployments and move to that kind of managed cloud services, which we know has kind of been the focus this year, or last year, I should say. Do you think that cloud-first SD-WAN will eventually replace MPLS? And where do you see the future of WAN heading?
Yeah, so that journey has already begun several years ago, right? It's not something that we saw in particular this year. In a way, it's probably getting more of a spotlight because of the factors that I mentioned. MPLS is a really good protocol for predictable application performance. It's pretty robust. It's deployed. A lot of the telcos providers are well entrenched with their investment there. But it's not the one that is most conducive to managing change. It's not the one that's most conducive to delivering flexibility. Traditional SD-WAN brings about more agility. It really doesn't have a way to deliver predictable application performance, particularly if an organization is distributed with a global footprint. So that's the notion of what we call as the cloud-first WAN, in a way, because those are the reasons why organizations are trending towards cloud-first architectures. And by cloud-first, I don't necessarily mean public cloud only, right? It's more about can you make the network and network security as easy to consume as you would any applications from the cloud. And to do that, you need to be able to deliver things as a service. You need to have a very simplistic model, and the ease of engagement should be really simplified end to end, right? With a very predictable application performance. And this needs to be regardless of what kind of model you have. So cloud first doesn't mean public cloud only. It is really a way of operationally delivering this service as well. So those are the things that have actually gained a lot of momentum as CIOs start to combine the need for predictability with flexibility and agility. And that's a killer combination. So we do anticipate MPLS networks to continue to shift to more cloud-first architectures. That's in line with how organizations are treating their applications. In fact, one of the things that came about in this report as well is the number of individual applications that an organization is starting to put into a cloud-like model, as well as SaaS applications. So in a way, the network follows the needs of the applications, and that's something we see here. And if you look at it, that also is the promise of things like SASE. SASE is nothing but a cloud-delivered architecture for both network and network security as a service. So all of these trends are, pointing in the right direction. We were thinking this would be sometime in the 2025 timeframe. I think the whole set of happenings from 2020 compressed that timeline by at least a couple of years. I think 2021, as we all come out of the pandemic, the WAN is going to be certainly in the spotlight, and it is going to either enable the organization to move very rapidly or become a bottleneck. And the kind of focus that a forward thinking CIO can put on the WAN is really going to determine how quickly and how far they're going to be able to move.
Yeah, such key information there, and a lot that people can kind of take away. Shashi, all I can say is it's always an absolute pleasure chatting with you, and really appreciate you coming on today's episode and walking us through this.
Thank you, Max. Always a pleasure to talk to you, and I would encourage your viewers also to kind of go to our website and download the report. It should be available soon.
Definitely, 100% agree. Yes, thank you everyone who took the time to view this episode. We hope you really enjoyed it. Cannot strongly recommend enough to head over to aryaka.com and download that report. There's a lot of useful, great information on there for you to check out. We'll be back next week with another episode in our Tech Chat series. Until then, you can join the conversation at EM360 Tech on Twitter and LinkedIn. Subscribe to this YouTube channel, and of course, for more great daily content, head on over to em360tech.com.